Hello, this is Matthew Randall, and in this tutorial I want to have a look at sculpting workflows, and specifically the sculpting workflow between Maya and the sculpting tool Mudbox. Um, it's really important to understand the workflow that you're using with these tools, because what you don't want to do is have a really nice sculpt that you can't use. So we really need to make sure that we can, once we've got that nice sculpt inside a Mudbox, that we can take that sculpt to back into Maya if we're rendering with Arnold, or into our games engine, wherever it is that we want to take it. So let's get into this. Okay, so this is kind of like my kind of workflow, or insight, or a diagram of the kind of various workflows that we can use inside of with Maya and Mudbox. Okay. And really what I want to focus on is just this area here. So this area here is what I'm saying here is we need to start with a base model. That base model needs to support subdivision smoothing. Okay, that's really, really important. Okay, so it needs to be a clean mesh with no sort of non-manifold geometry inside it. And when you press 3, you should get a really nice smooth geometry, and any edges that need to be hardened also need to be hardened in order to support or reinforced in order to support subdivision smoothing. Okay, and the reason for that is that what Mudbox does, in order to support the really sort of high res details in your sculpt, it subdivides the model lots and lots and lots. Okay, to the point where you have like millions and millions of faces. So it subdivides it right down multiple levels. Okay. So obviously your model needs to be able to cope with that, otherwise it won't work inside a Mudbox. Obviously, where you get that model from, there's various places. You could obviously model that up yourself against a reference image or some concept art. There might be a model in a library somewhere. So there are like base model libraries you can get a hold of that can help you with things. This can work. You could do a photogrammetry scan and then clean up, because obviously the photogrammetry scan is going to give you a really bad mesh, and then clean up the mesh. And it'll take you some time to clean it up, but you could do that. So there's several ways of deriving it, but you need to have a clean model that will subdivide. You also want, it also needs to have a proper UV layout. So all the UVs need to be mapped out. Okay, and the reason for that is, again, the displacement maps. What we do with Mudbox is we export images for things called displacement maps. Okay, and we need a UV layout to support that. I'll describe a displacement map in a bit more detail, but we need a UV layout to support that. It needs to be a good UV layout, and the most important thing is we can't have overlapping UVs. That's really, really important. Okay, so we bring that inside of Mudbox. We can subdivide that down inside of Mudbox, use our various sculpting tools to create a really nice sculpt. And then what we want to do is bring that back into either, so this box here represents either the Maya Arnold combination, or whatever renderer you might be using, or possibly a game engine that might support displacement maps of some sort. Okay. So once we've done our high level sculpt here, what you'll have is a really detailed sculpt, and on a subdivided model consisting of millions of polygons. What you don't want to do is bring that that detailed sculpt straight into whatever package you're using. Okay, even if you bring it into Maya, you don't want to do that. Okay, what you want to do is bring in a lower a model with a lower polygon count. So bring in a model from a lower subdivision level with fewer polygons. Bring that into Maya, okay, or your game engine, and then the detailed parts of the sculpt, those will basically be kind of encoded or baked into something called a displacement map. So a displacement map is basically an image-based texture that uses the UV layout, so that follows the UV layout. And this image-based texture basically tells the renderer how much to displace this low detailed geometry in order to get the high details that you've created in this sculpt. Okay, so you'll see us go into more detail on this as we go through. Okay, but that's the general kind of workflow that we're talking about in this lecture, and that's what you'll see us doing. Okay, so let's start off. So we need a really good clean base model. We don't want any, as I said, we don't want any artifacts in there. Press 3 to see the smooth mesh preview in Maya to really check that it's working. If there's any artifacts in that needs to be cleaned up. Make sure that your faces are kind of even across the model. So I know when you're kind of when you're modeling things, you might have sort of a smaller number of faces at the back and a larger number of faces at the front, where you've got, say, here where we've got the face, you might want more polygons. So there will be some imbalance, but obviously we don't want this to be too extreme. We want good flowing topology as well. Okay. Another thing you can do is as you're kind of building your base model, feel free to export that as an FBX and just open it up in Mudbox just to check if there's any errors. So maybe you could do that as you're modeling it, just to check that there's no problems, no errors kind of coming into your model. Okay, next. Okay, UVs. So your UVs need to be nice and clean. I think we've talked about sort of clean UVs in the past. The main thing I want to highlight here is, again, no overlapping UVs. So for example, if we had this hand here, in some workflows you might want this hand to be the UVs here to be laid exactly over the top of this hand here. Okay, it just makes it more efficient when you're painting it. It makes more efficient use of textures. So there's certain workflows where you might want to use that. For this, certainly if we're planning to use displacement maps, we don't want to do that. Okay. For general painting in Mudbox, that's not so much of a problem. But if we're doing things like normal maps or displacement maps or bump maps, i.e. trying to any kind of maps that are being used to kind of add detail to the I want to say the geometry of the mesh, but that's not quite right. But are going to shape the geometry in some way. You can't have overlapping meshes. It will cause you all sorts of problems. Okay, so yeah, avoid that. Okay, final thing, usual things when you're exporting from Maya to go to another tool: freeze your transformations, delete your history, and then obviously export the geometry as an FBX. Okay, so let's go into Maya. Oh, sorry, I want to go into Maya here. Okay, so let's go into Maya. What I want to do then is I want to start off with a base model. One of the things I wanted to show you was actually inside of Maya, inside of your installation. So if you've installed it in the standard place, so your Autodesk on your C drive, if you go into Maya 2020, examples, modeling, you've actually got some sculpting base meshes in here. Lots of different base meshes that you can use. These are kind of for sculpting inside of Maya. You can do sculpting inside of Maya, but what you've got to keep in mind is that really that is some sculpting tools that have been added to a modeling package, whereas Mudbox is a sculpting tool from the ground up. Okay, so they aren't really equivalent. Does that make sense? So really, if we're really trying to sculpt, we want to use something like Mudbox. Okay, so these were kind of to be used inside of Maya, but you can equally use these in Mudbox. So I'm just going to use the bipedal one, and I think I'm just going to use the Monster Wolfman one. So I'm just going to move this over here, drag the Monster Wolfman into here. And here we are. So I've got my base mesh in here. I haven't actually looked at the UVs on this. Let's have a quick look at the UVs. Hopefully it's got a set of UVs on it if it's ready to sculpt. Let's go into layout. UV editor, yep. So we've got a good set of UVs on there. That's all ready to go. Obviously I don't need to yeah, I'll go through the process anyway. So when I want to export this out, then And it seems to have a good topology. So to export this out as an FBX, what I want to do is go into here. I haven't got any transformations applied to this, but let's imagine it's a model I was working with. I would go modify, freeze transformations to zero out these transformations. As I said, they're already zeroed. There's probably no construction history to this, but again, I would go delete by type, delete history to do the delete history, and then I can just go file, and I just want to go export selection. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is export. I'm just going to call it Wolfman, and export that. I'm just working in a temporary folder in my V drive. I'm going to export that as an FBX. So if you may not have FBX showing here, so click on this down arrow and then just select FBX format. Don't select this one. This is like an engineering application here. We want this one. This is the kind of Autodesk FBX format. Okay. Let's go export selection. So we've exported that. Now what I want to do is go over to Mudbox and just import that model. So in fact, I might just open it up. I think I just open it up. Click open. Yeah, here's FBX, and I can just open up the Wolfman. Here we go. So here we have our Wolfman ready to sculpt. Okay, so first thing we want to have a look at is make sure we've got object list viewable. So you might be on layers. Make sure you're looking at object list. And so in here we can see here we've got our Wolfman object here. Okay, and if we click on it, we can see we've got a level 0 mesh. We haven't got any levels below that. Okay, so what we can do is we can, with this selected, what I can do is I can go Shift D. Okay, I don't even think I need to have it selected. I think I just go Shift D. Yeah, so I can go Shift D, and what you'll see is I'm adding these extra levels of subdivision along here. So I'll keep going Shift D. I'm going to go to, how many polygons have I got now? I'm going to go another level. Okay, so now I've got over 1 million polygons. Okay, so this is a really detailed mesh that can support, I can go even further than that, that can support some quite detailed sculpts in here if I want to do that. Okay, excellent. Again, as I said, you can move around Maya just using the standard Mudbox, using the standard Maya controls, just pressing Alt and using the mouse. Okay, great. Okay. So I'm not going to kind of do a detailed sculpt here. All I'm going to do is add some sculpt details here on this, enough that I can kind of show you the workflow and round tripping back into Maya, okay, with the low level geometry, the low level subdivision level geometry, and the displacement map. Okay, so yeah, so we've created all these subdivisions. You can actually navigate up and down the subdivisions using page up, page down. So you can see it when it's changing subdivision levels. It tells you that, and it tells you how many polygons there are. Okay, so you can see we've got all that. Excellent. Okay, one of the things we need to do is just check our UV map. So if I go in here, if I click on UV view, you'll see we've got no UV map in here. Okay, and actually what's happened is it hasn't created the UV. So if I go back to, I'm just going to go back to level 0 and look at the UVs there. There I've got it. But I haven't got it on any of the levels below it. Okay, so I'm going to go back down to my level 5 subdivision. Okay. So you've got the idea that level 5 is my really detailed mesh and level 0 is my original mesh that I imported in. Okay, so now what I can do is if I go into create, actually I think I can go, UV maps, and I think I'll just go recreate UV levels. Okay, so all it's doing is basically creating the UVs for all the levels that we've created. Okay, so you can see it's recreating all these UV levels. Again, if I go down the levels, you should see that we get a less detailed, a UV map that reflects that as I go down the levels. Okay, excellent. Okay, so that's setting up our subdivision levels. Now we can do our sculpts. Okay, so now when you're doing a sculpt, you want to think about what subdivision level you're doing the sculpt on. You don't necessarily want to do all the sculpts on the lowest level but but that's something for you to think about. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to demonstrate some of these tools. So I'm just going to get the grab tool here, and you can see that I can just grab this geometry and start pulling this out, okay, and sculpting this geometry, okay. And what I can do is if I press B, I can kind of modify the size of the brush. So I'm kind of grabbing just a small bit of geometry, okay. Or I can, and what I can also do, if I press M, I can adjust the strength of the brush. So I can make the brush kind of quite weak, so I've got to move it a lot in order to have an effect, okay. So it all depends on the sort of fine level of detail that I want to add on there, okay. So this is my grab tool. I'm just going to kind of put the brush sort of back up to that, and I think I'll just make it a little bit more powerful. So this is my grab tool. So typically if I'm really trying to pull bits out of the geometry, I might use the grab tool. If I'm using, say, if I'm putting kind of muscles on there, I might use the wax tool. So you can see I can kind of add some muscles on there, and then I might want to kind of just smooth that out a little bit. It isn't looking very muscular at the moment, it's kind of looking like a blob, but you can see that I can kind of smooth that out a little bit, and it makes it look less severe. And obviously if I practice with that, I can get kind of a better kind of muscle effect with this. So if I get my wax and just kind of reduce the strength of that down, I kind of think, what you want to do is look at lots of photographic references and understand where that muscle's going. As I say, I'm not trying to create a sculpting tutorial here at this point, but there you go. I might put a bit of muscle there and then smooth that down here to kind of make that look a little bit more muscular, okay. Okay, so you can kind of experiment with these tools as you go along, okay. Something else that we can do is we can add, we can use the stencil tool to add kind of details here. So just going to pull this up a little bit. So at the moment we haven't got any stencil on there, but I can kind of select a stencil, and then I might just use, I think I'm going to use the wax with it. Where are you, wax? Here, okay. And then maybe increase my brush size a little bit, okay. I might want to make the brush a little less powerful. Let's see what that looks like, okay. So what I'm going to do is just sculpt through the stencil tool, and you can see that the detail of the stencil is coming through into, if I turn this off, is coming through into our sculpt here, okay. I think I still got that a little bit sort of too powerful. Let's just maybe I might go Control Z just to undo that. You can go Control Z to undo something if you don't like it. Again, I might just use something that's a little bit softer, and again I'm just going to reduce the I might reduce the brush size down a bit and certainly reduce the strength of it down a little bit. There we go. So you can see we're kind of sculpting in sort of details here. It might be that wax isn't the right way to go. I might just try foam. Yeah, that kind of seems like a better way to go, but I need to make the tool a lot less powerful. Okay, there we go. And you can see I can kind of add like a scaly texture. I can obviously import images to use as a stencil as well. That's not a problem, okay? So we've got a stencil. We've got a stamp as well, which is kind of similar, but you're just sort of stamping the detail in. So I'm going to just turn the stencil off. Stamp tool, you're just kind of stamping the detail in. So rather than going through a stencil, you just kind of, it's just a stamp on the brush basically. And again, you can turn that off when you don't want that, okay. Other things we can do as well is you have various brush options here. So what we can do is again, I might just demonstrate this with the grab tool, but all the brush options have this. You can kind of turn the mirroring on, so I can mirror in the x-axis. So grabs I do here, or I might just do this with the wax tool actually. If I click wax, again I need to switch the symmetry back on. I can do it on both sides. Symmetry is really useful, especially when you start working on a model. So when you're doing all your kind of initial details on your model, symmetry is great, but remember you need to turn symmetry off at some point and paint in details, different details for each side of the model. If a model's completely symmetrical, it's just going to look kind of a little bit artificial to the user. Okay, so we've done the symmetry tool and we've done stamp. And so what I want to do now is basically round trip this model back into Maya. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to select the level that we want to export. So I'm just going to go down the subdivision levels. So I'm thinking, I don't know whether. One of the things that is useful is to perhaps turn on, I don't know if I've got this switched on, but if I go display, I have got wireframe on there, so it's not showing me all the subdivision levels. Okay, fine. Oh, sorry. Yeah, if it might be you're not seeing the subdivision levels. If that's the case, I'm trying to remember. I think it's off by default. So you want to go into you want to go into display and select wireframe as well. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking I might want to just export a level 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select level 1. So you can see I've got level 1 selected there. If I go down to level 1, I should kind of see that selected. There we are. So I've got level 1 selected. I want to export the level 1 mesh and then export a displacement map to support the level 1 mesh. Okay, you can do level 0. Sometimes I find it may or may not work if you go too low on the subdivision levels. So for this purpose, I'm just going to use level 1. I'm going to export it at level 1 and then export a displacement map to support the level 1 mesh. So I need to export this first of all. So I'm going to go File, so File, I want to go File, Export Selection. Okay, and I'm going to just work again in my V drive, my temporary area in my V drive. Where's that? Here, and I will just call it Wolfman but Sculpt. Okay, underscore Sculpt. Okay, and again, it's going to save it as an FBX. That's fine. So we're using FBX in our workflow. Let's go into Maya now. So I'm just going to go File, New Scene. And I'm just going to go and import that geometry. Okay, so just going to go back to my V drive again. I'm not actually using a proper Maya project, and I should do, but just for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just kind of working in this one folder here. So I'll bring in the sculpt. Let's import that. And then you'll see it's a slightly more detailed mesh that we've got back. And it probably looks very similar actually to the original one. I don't know if there's much detail that we did that would have come out. I think you can see there is some detail there. That's come out of the sculpt. As I say, this is the really low sort of level detailed mesh that we're bringing in. Okay, so now what we want to do is export a displacement map to support this subdivision level. Okay, so let's go back into my Mudbox. Okay, and what we want to do is obviously you need to make sure, obviously what we want to do is export all the details in our level 5 geometry, and what you want to do is make sure, I'm just going to go up. So you want to make sure that you've got the UV map for that level, okay? Because if you haven't, Mudbox just kind of doesn't export it and kind of it just gets stuck in some kind of loop and never finishes. So it just won't finish the export and it will just hang basically. Okay, so make sure we're going to export all the details at subdivision level 5, so we need to make sure we've got a UV map for that. Okay, I don't think we've created the UV map for the low. Oh yeah, we have got all the UV maps for the lower subdivisions anyway. It would have created that in order to create the 5. But anyway, make sure you've got that the UV map for the subdivision level that you want to export the displacement map at. Okay, back to our 3D view. What we want to do is we want to go into this UV and maps menu, go extract texture maps, and we're just going to go new operation. And what we're going to do is we're going to export a displacement map. Okay, So the settings I'm using here are here to support Arnold. Just keep in mind that you might need to change some of these settings if you're trying to use a displacement map in a different renderer. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Yeah. Okay, so what we want to do is in here we want to support level. We want this to be level 1, not level 0. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go remove, and I'm going to go, if I select level 1 here and go add selected, there we are. If I still got, is it still level 0? Let's try that again. Remove, select the level, or yeah, there's a slight difference in how this works from the older version, I think. So now, if I just go add selected, so it's added this Wolfman. It has added it at level 0, but if I click on this level 0, I can pick whatever level I want to go at. So I'm going to go at level 1. Okay, great. Now what I want to do is, and then I just want to check my export level. So obviously, what I'm doing is I'm creating a displacement map using the level 5 details, so that's our source, to target the level 1 model. Okay, all right. If you happen to do level 0, then obviously you'd click this and target the level 0 model. Okay, so coming down, in terms of our methods, the method that we want to use to create the displacement map is subdivision, so make sure that subdivision is turned on. If you have problems with subdivision, then try ray casting, but usually I will just start off with subdivision. Okay. Then we want to have a look at image size. This is the default size is quite small, so you want to kind of increase it. I tend to kind of go with this unless I need an extra anything larger. So I'm going to obviously, if you go for your largest, that's going to take a lot of processing power. Okay, so I'm going to go for this resolution. Brilliant. Okay. Then what we want to do is to support a displacement map, we need a high color resolution. Okay, so we need lots of bits per channel. Okay, there's a standard kind of, I don't know, JPEG type color resolution or isn't enough. Okay, so to have a really detailed displacement map, we want to go for a 32-bit floating point image. It's a large image, but we need that detail. Okay, so we've got that. Next thing we want to do is click on here to define a name. So I'm just going to click on there. I'm going to put it into our V drive in the temp folder that we're working in. Okay, I'm just going to call it Wolf Disp. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to decide what format I'm going to use. I'm going to use you'll notice we want to use a format that supports 32-bit floating point. There's only actually 2 here. This depends on where you're going and what you're going to. I'm again targeting Arnold, so I'm going to use OpenEXR, but you might find that, say you're going to a game engine or something, TIFF might be better. And again, if you're going to a game engine, you might find that actually floating point is too large, it's too high a resolution, you need to use a slightly lower resolution. Okay, but for this sort of workflow in Arnold, for rendering with Arnold, I'm going to use a 32-bit, and I'm going to use OpenEXR. Right, let's select that, save, and then we'll just click extract. So now what it's going to do is it's going to do this extract process. You can kind of see it counting up the percentage here of the extract process. I'm just going to go and pause while it finishes. Okay, so the map has been successfully extracted. I'll just click OK, and you'll see if I go to my V drive, temp, sorry, there's our .exr file. Okay. Okay, so now what I want to do is bring that in as a displacement map into Maya. So we'll go back into Maya. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to use a shader that supports displacement maps. Okay, so we're going to render in Arnold. So I'm going to right click and I'm just going to go assign new material. This brings up this dialog box here, and I'm going to use an Arnold shader, and I'm just going to use the standard surface AI standard surface shader. This is like the standard surface shader in Arnold that supports all the goodness that Arnold has in terms of what it can do. Okay, great. So I'm going to click on that. All right. And just to see what we're getting, I'm just going to put in some lights in here. If I render in Arnold without any lights, it's just black. So I need to put some lights in here. I'm just going to go lights. I'm just going to go physical sun sky, just so we've got some lights in here. And if I go render, okay, so we can see we've got a kind of white material here, which is fairly shiny. So that should show up our details quite nicely. Okay. One of the things I am going to do is I'm just going to click on the sorry, I don't want that view. I'm going to click on the render settings here. That brings up this dialog box, and in here I can just kind of switch up the size of it. So I want full HD, close. So now when I render it, I get a larger image. Hopefully, if I go 1:1, you can see I get a larger, sort of more detailed image for my render. He says, let's try that again. Yeah, I'm not full HD, am I? Sorry. Where are we? Full HD. There we go. Close that. The other thing I might want to do is if I just click on the background here, you'll see that our physical sun sky is this kind of is a HDR light on this sphere here. One of the things I might want to do, just to kind of avoid this noise that we're seeing on here, is just to turn up our samples. I don't want to go crazy with it because it will make the render take a long time. But if we turn that up to 3, there we go. So we should be getting kind of, yeah, so that's giving us a nicer sort of cleaner render. Obviously, once that's all rendered out, that'll look great. Okay, let's close that. So now, this is just setting up lights in our render. Now what I want to do is actually go back to this shader that we've applied to this object here and connect the displacement map to that shader. Okay, so in order to do that, I need to go into the hypershade view. I'm just going to bring that in. It brings up this kind of interface here. This is the AI standard surface shader that we've just created. So I'm going to select that, and I'm just going to go graph input output connections. So what this is showing is this is the settings for our AI standard surface shader, and then obviously that's all getting sent to the actual Arnold shader to render out. Okay, what we want to do is we want to connect a displacement shader to this as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to click on this. We're going to click on this node here, and we're just going to click on this to bring up the attributes for this node. And then what we want to do is click on this so that we can connect a file, a displacement material to our model. Okay, so I'm going to click on this file here. Okay, then it brings up this dialog box here, and I'm going to click on File. And you'll see that it's added some nodes here. I'm just going to make this a little bit larger so you can kind of see it. But you can see it's added some nodes here. We've got a displacement shader now, which is connected to a file. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to connect. We want to click on the file here. Okay, so I've just clicked on the file node, and that allows us now to to specify where that file is. So click on that file node. I want to click on this folder here. Okay, that'll open up our dialog box, and I can just go to my V drive, temp, and I want this again. It's this displacement map here that I want to import. So I'm just going to go open. All right, so we've opened that. What I want to do is make sure that my color space is set to raw. Okay, basically I don't want to, there shouldn't be any kind of, when we export our displacement map, there's no kind of gamma applied to that image, and that's really what we're saying here. There is no gamma applied to that image, so make sure the color space is set to raw. Okay, great. So that should be all the settings now. That should all be set up to work there. Let's have a look what we've got here. So we can see that it's coming in and it's doing a render. I might just move the camera in a bit closer to the details so we can see. Here we are. Excellent. So you can see that the details of that is coming in to support that render. Okay. Something else that we might need to do, we haven't had to do that in this case, but something we might need to do is just click on the model and go into your Arnold settings. Okay, and I think maybe this is doing it automatically, but it's just worth being aware of it. Go into your Arnold settings and let's scroll down to subdivisions. Okay, and in here we can kind of specify how the subdivision is done. So we can say, hey, we want Catmull Clark, and I want to subdivide it, you know, so many levels. Okay, in our render. We haven't needed to do that in this case, but that might be something you need to do. Okay, and let's see what the render looks like now. Okay, and I think that has actually improved the quality of the displacement map a little bit as well. So again, that's a really important step to do. So yeah, there we have it. What we've done there is bring all of that in, and we've done a full sort of round trip into back into Maya. Okay, so to wrap this up then, all I really want to say is when we do our sculpting, again, I'm going to link to another tutorial which will give you that kind of sculpting in a bit more detail. But when we're doing our sculpting, what we want to do is we want to kind of sculpt the details in gradually. Okay, so what you want to do is not just kind of focus on one area and doing it in detail, but you want to sculpt the whole model roughly. Okay, in detail. Okay, so you want to add the details gradually. You can see that happening here across the whole model. Okay, so you know, trying to get the general shape first and the muscles, and then kind of sharpening up the muscles, and then you're kind of adding the more detailed kind of wrinkles and sort of skin details and scales get added in as you go along. Okay, the other thing I just wanted to point out is that if you need this, Mudbox has some retopology tools built into it. So if you were in your sculpt, you do a grab and you kind of manipulate your model quite severely. Okay, you do quite a strong manipulation of your model. So you might find that the topology isn't correct for it anymore. So inside a Mudbox, there are retopology tools that you can use, and basically what you can do, I'm not going to go into detail about it now. You can kind of search for tutorials on this, but you can kind of create curves which guide Mudbox in terms of the shape of the topology you want. So you can kind of go from this sort of topology that doesn't really support the shape of the face at all to a kind of topology that kind of makes more sense. Okay, so really all I wanted to say was that there is retopology tools built into it. Okay, hopefully that's given you kind of a good idea of how to kind of support or how to round trip your work from Maya into Mudbox, do a sculpt, and then bring it back into Maya for rendering in Arnold. Okay, thank you for listening.